Welcome to another edition of Marriage for Better for Worse. I'm your host, Pastor Bob Moeller. And for the next 30 minutes, we're going to look at issues that impact our marriage, our family, our relationships as a single or married individual. We're going to do so from a distinctly scriptural or biblical viewpoint, which we believe is the foundation for all wisdom. I'm not a psychiatrist, psychologist. I'm not a marriage therapist. I'm a pastor who believes that listening, caring, prayer, and God's Word can solve relationship problems. Let me encourage you to consider getting a copy of our newest book, The 6 Hearts of Intimacy. The 6 Hearts of Intimacy, enjoying deeper love and passion in your marriage. This book will help couples realize 6 different ways they can bring the love and passion in their marriage to a new level. You can get it by going to any major online distributor. The 6 Hearts of Intimacy, by Bob and Cheryl Moeller. Our topic for this program is one that's more personal than usual. I've entitled it, What I Would Do Differently If I Could Raise My Children Again. Cheryl and I have been blessed with 6 grown children, all of whom are married now, and we have a large number of grandchildren, and we're so grateful for each and every one. As I look back over my life and review what kind of parent I was, what would I do differently is one of the questions that I've asked myself. I'm always looking in some way for God to try and improve or grow or mature who I am, whether it be as a husband, a father, a grandfather now. And I jotted down these thoughts. They're more than random. They actually are convictions. I've thought about them for a while. And I thought maybe they would be of help to those of you who are either raising children or have raised them, but would like a better relationship, perhaps, with your kids. Or perhaps would like to undo or redo some things that didn't turn out so well. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 10 through 12, Paul writes this, "You are witnesses, and so is God, of how holy, righteous, and blameless we were among you who believed. For you know that we dealt with each of you as a father deals with his own children, encouraging, comforting, and urging you to live a life worthy of God, who calls you into his kingdom and glory." When I read that a few years ago, I was really impacted by the thought, here's a description of how a father should relate to his children. This is how a father should raise his children, because this is God's inspired word, and Paul is reminding the people at the church of Thessalonica that he lived among them the way a father, with God's blessing and direction, would live with his children. So that made me sit up and think, well, what did you do as a father that I should do, even now at this point in my life? Well, that led me to start asking, what would I do differently if I had it to do all over again? Truth is, Cheryl and I raised children for about 38 years, from the first to the last one getting married. It was somewhere 37 or 38 years. So I've had a long time to think about this. Here's some things I put down. And again, I trust that this will be helpful to at least some of those who are watching. Number 1, I would worry less about my children turning out, because by God's grace and mercy, they will anyway. I would worry a lot less about them turning out, because by God's grace and mercy, they will anyway. You know, we can do our very best, and sometimes we can fall short of that. But we have to remember, when we put our children in God's hands, ultimately we have to trust Him for how they would turn out. And to live by faith that, yes, God is going to shape them and mold them into the person He wants them to be. I think that's a conviction, or maybe an act of faith we need to live live out, because otherwise we're going to worry, sweat, get upset, and whatever, lose our sanctification every time they do something that concerns us, and that's a terrible way to live. You know what, looking back, for all the ups and downs and good and bad moments, they did turn out. And I think we need to live with that kind of confidence when we entrust our children to the Lord. Number 2, I would spend at least 1 hour alone with each child each week. I would spend at least 1 hour showing individual attention, quality time, quantity time with each child every week, so that they knew I noticed, I was aware, I cared about them, and I could stay up to date with what was happening. You know, when our kids seem to be doing fine, we can go days, weeks, months without really spending time alone asking them about their heart or their life. Number 3, I would not sweat the small stuff, because most stuff is small. You know, they forget their robe at 8th grade graduation. They leave some muddy shoes on the floor. Perhaps they didn't finish their homework. Now, I'm not saying don't care about making them responsible people and don't ignore, or I'm not saying ignore the things that they should be doing and they're not. But you know, I'm talking about sweating the small stuff, getting so crazy and upset over things in the end that really don't matter. You know, making everything a capital offense or nearly that is a bad idea, because most stuff is small, meaning that when all is said and done, it's not going to change the direction of their life or how it comes out. It's temporary, and it really doesn't matter. I would give my children the right to be honest with me while remaining respectful. You know something, so often as parents, we don't want to hear the truth. We live our lives as adults, and maybe we do the best we can, but we don't want any feedback from our children. We don't want to know if we're hurting them or causing them sorrow or making them nervous or worrisome or whatever. You know, children should be seen and not heard is the old philosophy. Well, I think that's all wrong. I think we should give our children the right to be respectfully honest with us. Like saying, you know, I get really scared when you and Mommy argue. When you two raise your voices, I get nervous. They should be able to say that to you, because we shouldn't be raising our voices and we shouldn't be making them nervous. We should allow them to be honest. You know, Daddy, when you come home, you just watch the computer or your phone or whatever, but you never play a game with me. I think you should be able to say that. Again, respectfully, but if I had it to do over again, I'd encourage a lot more honesty from my children. I would laugh far more than I shout. I'd laugh more than I shout. You know something? At the end of the day, life is funny. Why is it that years later, when we look back at things we got so upset about with our kids, we laugh now? Really, we laugh when we tell the story. We don't get all nuts like we did then. Why? Because we've realized, you know what, it wasn't that big of a deal, and that laughter, you know, a cheerful heart is what builds a house. Shouting and criticism is what tears one down. And, you know, just a spirit of laughter over most things is probably in order. I would deal with my own emotional and spiritual issues before trying to deal with their issues. Not a matter of either or, but one of priority. Okay, it doesn't mean I can't deal with emotional and spiritual issues in my kids, but I wish I had been working on my own far more than I was. And I wish I would have been a lot more concerned about what progress I was making rather than picking on them or, you know, hovering over them and pointing out their problems and their faults. I would listen more to their dreams rather than impose mine on them. This is really important. I wish I had listened more to what their dreams were for their life. And you know, originally when they're young, they want to be a fireman or they want to be a a nurse, a doctor, they may want to be, whatever. And it's probably not going to happen. But as they get into junior high and high school and towards leaving the home, their dreams are starting to take on some real shape and form. We should ask them about that. And unless it's something that we could see would be clearly destructive or entirely unsuited for them, and even then we may be wrong, we should encourage them in their dreams rather than imposing ours. I would first consider the lasting impact on their lives before making a major decision. In other words, before I would accept a job at another state or move them out of their school or, create some kind of major upheaval in their lives, I would stop and really prayerfully consider the impact on them. While this might be a great move for me, it could be devastating. One of my daughters said to me once, it was really hard year after year being the new kid in school. How many adults really stop and consider that when they're considering whether to move neighborhoods or even within the city? What's it going to be like for my daughter to be the new kid this year and then she was 2 years ago? Well, I think we need to pay more consideration of the impact on our kids before we do things that are major league. I would ask them more often about their soul. I would ask them more often, how are you in Jesus? Do you know Jesus? Have you accepted him? Not with pressure, but with real concern. That I would ask them spiritually, how are you doing? And age-appropriate questions. And because at each stage of life, probably they might answer that in a different way. But again, we assume we take them to church. Maybe we even read the Bible at home. They're part of the youth group. We assume their soul is great. Maybe it's not. And the first responsibility for their spiritual welfare is their parents, not the church, and not the youth group or their teacher. Number 10, I would personally pursue holiness more than happiness. I read someone say that the other day. A woman who was in her 70s or 80s was asked what she would do differently in life. And she said, I would have pursued holiness more than happiness if I had it to do over again. I thought about that, and that's profound. Many times in life, we're just trying to do what makes us happy. Get a better job, build a bigger home, have a more exotic vacation. Well, it seems like many times we're always in our career, personal life, pursuing what would make us happy. I'll golf more, or I'll shop more, or whatever. But really, the goal of life is to become like Jesus, isn't it? And that means we need to become holy. We need to become set apart for his purposes. And so I think as a parent, I wish I had asked more often, am I just doing this to be happy, or am I doing this because I'd like to be holy and more like Jesus? Again, not in a legalistic way, pharisaical way, but in a genuine way. Am I pursuing what it means to be like Jesus more than just to live the American dream or to accumulate and end up at the end of life with a lot of toys but an empty soul? Well, I hope that some of these were helpful to you. As I've thought about them, I'm going to start doing them now, even though my kids are grown and I've got grandkids. Because it's never too late, as long as we're alive, as long as our kids, our grandkids are, it's never too late to change, is it? I don't think so. So yeah, I didn't do them then, but given the context now of my relationships, it's different because I'm not raising them directly, but still, I'd like to implement what I'm talking about even now at this stage of my life. I just encourage you to consider doing the same. Here's some questions that we put together based on experiences, questions I've been asked, pastors who've shared them with me. We'll try and move through these rather quickly with the time we have left. My wife and I had 4 children. They were all raised in the same house with the same love, affection, same rules, yet 2 of them as adults are walking with the Lord while 2 of them are not. Why is it that some children turn out so well while others break your heart? I keep going over how we raised them to see what I did wrong. Well, let me first of all affirm you, then let me caution you. Number one, I affirm you for looking back to see if there were things that you might have done that were hurtful or put obstacles in the way of your children believing. If so, go back and apologize for those specifically, directly, with humility with your children. Number two, realize that their behavior is not all your fault, all your doing. Someone has said God had two children, Adam and Eve, and they rebelled. They didn't turn out so well, and yet they had a perfect father in the Lord Jesus. Same is true of the parable of the prodigal son. So, because God has given us free will, some children choose to use that will to follow and respond to the Lord's grace. Others refuse it or harden their hearts, at least temporarily. Now, don't assume that's the end of the game, because sometimes it takes years for children to come back to Jesus, and I've seen that happen. My husband and I have different styles of discipline with our children. Whenever they do something that upsets me, he tells me to relax. It will be fine. Meanwhile, I'm left to be the bad cop in the marriage. Why do I have to always be the one to enforce discipline? Well, he gets away by just laughing and saying it's no big deal. You know, my sense of this is your marriage needs balance. And that's why God put two very different people in the home. The father, who's a little bit more, in this case, relaxed, mellow, easygoing. You, who's a little bit more concerned about the rules, want to enforce them, want accountability, believe discipline is necessary. Let me just suggest that both of you may be right, and that there are times to relax and that there's times to enforce the rules. Generally, if we're all one way or the other, we're out of balance, and our kids will suffer for that. Why don't you take the best of the two of you and work on bringing that to bear in your child raising? When my kids were growing up, my daughter once asked me, "Daddy, would you spend 1 hour each week with just me?" I said, "Sure, honey," but I never really followed through. Now as adults, I feel we've grown somewhat distant from one another where we used to be so close when she was young. Is it too late to rebuild the relationship we once had? I don't think so. I don't think it's too late. It won't be the same as when she was a child and you were her adult father. It's going to now be much more on the level of a friendship rather than an order of authority. But you can still have a great influence in her life. Why not call her and talk an hour a week if she's willing? Go back and start spending that time that she requested, and see if it doesn't begin to nurture or reawaken the relationship you once had. I grew up in a home where I could never really be honest with my parents. My mother was something of a hypochondriac. Every morning she woke up with a new ailment. There were even times when she said she had cancer. It would terrify us, but it always turned out that she did not. She was just afraid that she did. She just forgot to tell us when she got a good doctor's report, so we would go on worrying for weeks for no reason. Should children have the right to be honest and tell their parents when they are hurting or worrying them? Or would that be disrespectful? I think the mistake here is that the mother in this case was trying to get you and the other children to meet her emotional needs. She was worried, she was anxious. Apparently she wasn't getting that level of emotional support from her husband, so she turned to you kids. We call that parentification. Parentification, meaning the roles are switched. You became the parent. You were concerned about her health. She became the child. She was the one always complaining or worrying about it, and the rules got completely messed up. You know something, you need to forgive her for doing that. She did that out of her emotional deficits, but it still wasn't fair to you. Because as a 8-year-old child, what can you do when your parent says they have cancer and they start crying at the sink? Well, you're going to be frantic. You're going to be desperate to try and fix it. Well, go to the doctor, mommy, or whatever. That's wrong to put those things on children. Those are adult issues that should be shared with other adults, albeit other siblings or relatives or even a pastor or a counselor. You need to forgive her for parentification and realize that it is not, never was, your job to make your mother happy, keep her happy, or to keep her healthy. Our grown daughter believes we made a lot of mistakes in how we raised her. As a result, she lives out of state now and rarely, if ever, comes home. Yet, every 2 weeks, almost like clockwork, she gives us a call and chats for half an hour or so. I guess I'm confused. Does she want a relationship with us or not? Are we just supposed to ignore she never comes to visit, which is so hurtful, particularly at the holidays, and act happy on the phone whenever she calls? Well, that's a good question. I would say, based on the strained nature of your relationship, you should be grateful for the call. Maybe that's all they can bring themselves to do emotionally at this point, is call you. Maybe being with you is still a little bit too overwhelming. Let me suggest that you seek help and counsel as to what it might be that drove your child out of state, that has made them unwilling to come home. Maybe that's a question someday you could put to them and allow them to answer in an honest but respectful manner with you. My point is that when your adult children put distance, there's a reason. However, whatever steps they're willing to take toward you, you should be thankful for that, instead of complaining about the ones they have not taken. Somehow they'll pick up that negative attitude from you, and it may even set you back further than you are. My attitude, be thankful for what you have. Don't complain about what you do not. When we were raising our children, the most frequent emotion I experienced was feeling overwhelmed. I did everything I was supposed to do, including earning a living, going to all their games, taking the kids to doctor's appointments, getting them to church, attending their school plays. And while I loved my kids dearly, I felt like all the demands on me left me no time to ever enjoy the moment. I don't want to make the same mistake with my grandchildren. How can I be more emotionally present in their lives than I was with my own children? That, I too think, is an excellent question. You know, the feeling of being overwhelmed is usually based on an expectation we have of ourselves or others have put on us that's unrealistic. Yeah, sometimes we can get just buried under all the events of life, but if you feel that way 24/7, 30 days a month, 12 months a year, I think it's more than your circumstances. I think it's the expectations and the fear of failure that you might have, that I'm not doing enough, I'm not measuring up, I might fail, oh no, no one will love me unless I get everything right. Do you see the insecurity built into all that? I think that's so often why we feel overwhelmed. The Bible says, Jesus said, "Come unto me, all that are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." If we're not finding that rest, it's because we're not connecting with Jesus. We're not turning our problems over to Him. We're not accepting His unconditional love and forgiveness. We're living under some kind of works righteousness, which the gospel says clearly is wrong, because it is by grace through faith that you are saved, and not of yourselves, not of works. It is the gift of God, lest anyone should boast. So I would say the place to recalibrate is your understanding of grace and living by faith, and that you are accepted by God through Christ rather than earning your place. My husband and I served as a pastor in the local church for most of our adult lives. We have friends in the ministry whose children all grew up to become pastors as well. What did we do wrong that none of our kids wanted to follow in our footsteps? What did our friends do right? Well, there's more assumptions in that question than perhaps you should make. One is this, that because some children follow their parents into the ministry or mission work, all children in the ministry should do so. You know, that's simply not true. God has a separate plan for each child, for each family. It may be that you did some things to make the ministry unattractive. It could have been you complained about parishioners or board members, or you acted unhappy, or any number of things when you were criticized that turned them off. That could be If so, you need to apologize to your kids, ask forgiveness. But otherwise, be grateful if your children grow up to follow Jesus as their Savior. Listen, I once told my kids, one of them asked me, do I have to be a pastor like you in order to make you happy? And I said, no, all I ask is that I see you in heaven someday. I just want to see you in heaven. I just want to know that you're saved, and what you do with the rest of your life is minor in comparison to that ultimate question. My husband was just offered a significant promotion at work and a large increase in salary, but that would require that we move out of state, and 2 of our children are now in high school. We are feeling torn. We need the extra salary to help pay for college in the next years, but our kids are asking us to please let them graduate with their friends before we move. What's your advice? Well, my advice is that you pray and ask God for his leading. But going back to what I would do over again, taking into account how our kids feel, I think I'd stay and let them graduate. I think I would not put them through the upheaval of a move, having to make new friends, graduating with relative strangers. You know what? You have the rest of your life to find a church and serve a new one if you want. They only have the next 2 years to be with their friends and finish in a community maybe that they've grown to love and care for. I'm not playing God in this case, but I think I would say, why don't you listen to them and put off moving? Well, in conclusion, I'd like to go over the 10 things I would do differently. Just in case you're taking notes and would like it, here it is. I would worry less about them turning out, because by God's grace and mercy, they will anyway. Number 2, I would spend at least 1 hour alone with each child each week. Number 3, I would not sweat the small stuff, because most stuff is small. Number 4, I would give my children the right to be honest with me while remaining respectful. Number 5, I would laugh far more than I shout. I would deal, number 6, with my own emotional and spiritual issues before trying to deal with their issues. Number 7, I would listen more to their dreams rather than impose mine on them. Number 8, I would first consider the lasting impact on their lives before making a major decision. 9, I would ask them more often about their soul. 10, I would pursue holiness more than happiness. Those are the 10 things I would do if I had life to do over again. Well, do this over again. Join us again next week. Remember, marriage is for better, for worse, and for keeps.